Good morning to everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Ellie Patira, and I'm the newly appointed Commissioner at the Essential Services Commission. As a Ngāpuhi and Gunai woman, I am very proud to be hosting this event and for this to be the first event that I'm hosting. I do so from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and as is our custom, I acknowledge Wurundjeri and Woi Wurrung traditional owners, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to traditional owners of the lands and waterways on which we live and work, and which you all live and work, and to all First Nations people that are joining us today. This is a really wonderful opportunity to highlight the important and ongoing role that traditional owners and First Nations people play in shaping and enriching service delivery in Victoria. I'm also joined today by members of the Commission's water team and the Commission's chair, Gerard Brody. It's really pleasing to see the interest in this session. We've had over 100 people registered to attend today's event, and I welcome representatives from all water businesses, peak bodies, interstate economic regulators, consumer groups, government and the welfare sector. We appreciate you all joining us. This is the second in our series of workshops that are aimed at improving the quality of customer and stakeholder participation in regulatory planning and price setting processes. 2 weeks ago, the focus was on engagement practices that are inclusive of customers who experience vulnerability, and today's focus is on engagement practices that are inclusive of First Nations people, with a particular focus on traditional owner group engagement. Since 2023, the quality of engagement of First Nations people has formed part of the Commission's Primo pricing framework. The expectation of inclusive methods of engagement was part of a Commission-wide strategic approach to help break down barriers to essential services. The Commission's Getting to Fair strategy recognised that barriers to equitable access to essential services could be event-based, it could be features of the market, or it could be systemic in nature. We identified that we could use our Primo pricing framework as a way to help reduce some of these barriers. These efforts, particularly as they relate to First Nations engagement, also broadly align with the Victorian Government's self-determination reform framework, which calls out effective engagement mechanisms as an essential part of ensuring that the voices and participation of First Nations people rightfully informs strategic service provision. We know that when it comes to First Nations and traditional owner engagement, every water business is coming to it with their own local context, their own relationships at the local level, and their own history. Diversity of Victorians' traditional owner groups, including our varying priorities, recognition status, and our resourcing, means that there is no singular approach and no one measure of success in how we go about doing engagement. Today's session provides you all with an opportunity to listen and learn about the different pathways and approaches that water businesses currently have in place. We have invited speakers who can represent a real breadth of experiences that show the variation of the journey. And my ultimate hope in us hosting today's session is for you all to reflect on where you're up to connect with other organisations' experiences, and to think about conversations you need to be having in and around your own organisation ahead of your submission on the 2028 price set of price reviews. I'll finish off here and I'll hand over to Lucy Idle, Manager of Customer Engagement, who will introduce our speakers and take you through today's workshop. Over to you, Lucy.
Thanks so much, Ellie. My name's Lucy Idle. I'm the lead of the engagement element of Primo, and I also help develop the Commission's 2021 vulnerability strategy. And I would also like to add my acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the lands and waterways in which we all live and work, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm really proud of the work that we collectively do in improving access to essential services for customers and community. So today's session is specifically about engagement practices that identify and incorporate the needs and experiences of First Nations people into regulatory planning and decision making, as Ellie's spoken about. And we'll be hearing from 4 presenters. I will be hearing 4 presentations, followed by a Q&A panel session with all of the presenters. We'll be hearing from Gippsland Water, Wannon Water, Yarra Valley Water and Barwon Water. And I really want to thank our presenters for all the time and care that you have put in preparing for this session and your willingness to share your experiences in this open forum today. Engagement that is sensitive and appropriate is not a tick box exercise, and it does not always follow a linear path. So sharing lessons learned and can sometimes be uncomfortable, and hearing, but however, through the sharing that it's so valuable if our ambition is for collective, not just for individual gain. So a few housekeeping elements. Thank you everyone for coming today. Your cameras and mics are off now for the duration of the presentations. We'll be activating those. You'll be able to turn those back on once we get to the panel discussion. We're going to hear from presenters first before they respond to your questions during a Q&A panel discussion. You can add your questions into that Q&A function at any time. If your question is for one of the specific speakers, we've got 7, so please add their name alongside your question. And you can show your support for other people's questions by just adding a vote or a tick to what other people have posed. We are recording the event and we will share this on our website in the coming days, and you'll have access to that for quite a long period of time. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first presenters. From Gippsland Water, we have Michael Crane and Daniel Rodahan. Michael has made a career in enhancing the employee and customer experience in both public and private sectors. At Gippsland Water, Michael is responsible for organisational development, safety, customer service and communications and engagement. And a fun fact about Michael is that he's been known to moonlight on weekends as a muso. Daniel is a proud Jada Wajari man from the Wotjobaluk Nation. He made a late career change from operations to his current role as Healthy Country Lead, which has allowed him to strengthen his connections with community. Daniel is a board member at the Ramahayak Aboriginal Corporation and a board Aboriginal delegate for the East Gippsland Catchment Management Authority. So a fun fact about Daniel is that he actually has been invited and will have time to play Santa at this year's Ramahayak family Christmas party. So thank you very much, Daniel and Michael.
Lucy, I must apologise. We've just experienced the blackout in the office. So
Cause of the disruption. There may be further outages coming as we fix the.
okay, I think we're back in action. I can see Danny on the screen, so he is still with us. Lucy, thank you for that warm introduction. It's great to be with you this morning. We'll just go ahead to the next slide, if we may. And I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the lands of the Brackalong clan of the Gunai-Kurnai Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of context. This is where we reside. This is our sort of broader catchment area. So southeast of Victoria, from Drury in the west to Locksport in the east, up to Barwon in the north, and moving north in the south. Next slide, please. We're a little bit unique as far as regional water corporations go. And what I mean by that is we service a number of sort of significant state infrastructure. This sort of includes Opal, Esso. You'll all be familiar with sort of the Latrobe Valley sort of power stations. So we're quite big, very big pipes and pumps. Next slide, please. Okay, so across our operating area, we have two recognised RAPs, the Gunai Land and Waters Aboriginal Corporation. They cover approximately about sort of 95% of our operating area. And then there's the Bunurong Land Council Aboriginal Corporation, whose boundaries include parts of Warrigal and Barwon. Next slide. So in our approach to First Nations engagement, we've built a strong foundation over the years that's rooted in partnership, trust and respect. This isn't a transactional process for us. It's about forming genuine relationships with traditional owners and the broader First Nations community. Sarah Cumming, our Managing Director, has played a vital role in cultivating this commitment, and she's not only fostered these connections personally over the years, but with her leadership team has also embedded a culture at GW that's actively promoting the self-determination of TOs. When we embarked on our 23-28 price submission, this approach to partnership was central. Throughout the process, we engage regularly, sometimes even fortnightly and monthly. These were not mere check-ins, but opportunities to collaborate meaningfully with traditional owners, getting perspectives that genuinely shaped our thinking and our actions that we're working on each day sort of through the next price submission period. Every initiative involving First Nations voices in our submission was actually a product of this deep collaboration, co-designed hand in hand with traditional owners and the local Aboriginal community. By connecting in with established forums like the Brackalong Advisory Council and the Federation Uni's Aboriginal Engagement Centre, to name a couple, we invested time to understand the broader priorities and aspirations, and then always circled back in with the RAPs to ensure alignment. This was really key to ensuring that sort of what we arrived at and committed to in partnership with our TOs was aligned with expectations. During the last price submission engagement process, we noticed recurring themes that resonated with both our traditional owner partners and the wider First Nations community. Ideas like fostering meaningful career opportunities for Aboriginal people and celebrating cultural pride emerged as shared priorities, affirming our chosen directions. And so the ESC was keen to hear from us today on a couple of areas. In particular, engagement with the Bunurong traditional owners on individual projects to manage cultural values during the construction and operation of assets on their land. And they also wanted us to sort of touch on what we're doing in the Aboriginal scholarship and employment space. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Danny now, and he'll start to sort of take us through some of the details around some of these great initiatives. Danny, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I didn't have much to do or anything to do with the actual price submission, but in my 9 years here at Gippsland Water, I've really seen a change in the last 2 years since we've actually had resourcing and capacity to actually start delivering our inclusion plan. So the pricing submission has made a really big impact on where we are as an organisation. There's probably not a lot in these slides that you guys haven't seen or it's happening in different areas. It's just about our journey and where we're at the moment. And this slide just speaks to our engagement, mainly inward looking, how we've worked on engagement with and acknowledgement inside the business. So I think our business now looks a lot different than it did 2 years ago. I think it's a much safer and more welcoming space for traditional owners. And yeah, Gunai is the large part of our operational area, but also we're trying to build that relationship with Bunurong as well. So some of those things would be across the organisations as well. It's around recognising markers throughout the business that continually remind people of where we are, whose country we're on. Next slide, thanks. One of the projects that we delivered recently was a joint partnership with Gunai, the Glawak, where we provided reticulated water to the Knob Reserve at Stratford. It's a significant site for Gunai clans, a meeting place, lots of artefacts, so a very significant site. And it was a great opportunity for us to work close with the cultural heritage team and start to build that relationship and trust by spending time on country and providing experience that enhances the use of that significant place, the Knob Reserve. Next slide, thanks. We've also been working with Gunai's fire team to do some ecological burning on our farm at Dutson. Again, opportunity to build that relationship, be on country, bring a cultural element to what was an ecological burn, but it helped us understand the significance of fire, but also helped the Glowac team, build their capacity as well. And the other slide is just about the first time we actually engaged with Bunurong at one of our sites in Druin. We had a welcome to country and smoking on country, so significant for us that we were actually engaging in that space. And yeah, just a good opportunity to start to build that relationship there. The next slide is about a project that we're just starting this week. Actually, we're doing some sort of silo artwork over at Stratford. Glowac identified the Stratford site as one of that was significant for them and the preferred place where we start to do our sort of acknowledgement in this space. So we've taken elements of art from Alice Pepper's artwork Cultural Flow, and we're going to present them on that's a 20 metre high water tower at Stratford on the Princess Highway. So it's the start of our service area as you're coming into Gippsland from the east. So it's a good signal to everyone that shows that Gippsland Water is engaging and wants to acknowledge the traditional owners. And yeah, it's just a good way for us to show that respect to the Gunai people. The artist we've got for that is an artist called Matthew Adnate. He's the one who'll actually be applying that to the tank, and he actually won an Archibald Prize for artwork he did on another project. So really grateful to have him on board and look forward to delivering that in the next few weeks. Next slide. That's pretty much it from me. Other than to add to our engagement with Bunurong, we were on country yesterday with the Cultural Heritage team at Bunurong, and we were looking at doing cultural values assessments on a waterway at Druin. So we're branching out, we're trying to create opportunities, and it was a good experience for both of us to understand a bit more about each other's aspirations. So I rushed through that pretty quick, but that's where we're at as a business. Again, you guys have probably seen all this stuff in different shapes and forms, but yeah, we've made some significant headway in the last few years.
That's Michael. Great, Danny. Yeah, over to me for this next slide. So we're doing some really exciting things sort of in the scholarship and employment space, and I guess that's all sort of emanated from what we've heard through our engagement, and really in simple terms, what we're hearing is there's a real value on sort of long-term, meaningful, sustainable employment opportunities for Aboriginal people. It sort of feels like it goes without saying. So one thing we sort of did was sort of step back and sort of thought, well, how can we do that, and what sort of pathways can we sort of create into our business? And so it's sort of starting in sort of the high schools, connecting in sort of in that sort of year 9, sort of year 10 level, who we are, what we do, what could a career look like at Gippsland Water, and then partnering in with the likes of Federation University to offer Aboriginal scholarships, which has been a great outcome. But not just stopping there, getting that sort of connected up to our internship program, and then getting that connected up to our graduate program, to ultimately sort of arrive at a place where we're creating employment opportunities that can be, that are career-based and long term. So yeah, we're sort of trying to sort of thread all of that together and arrive at a place where young Aboriginal people can see a real meaningful and long-term career at Gippsland Water. Federation University have been fantastic. Shout out to Kurnai College, one of the local sort of high schools, sort of particularly in the Latrobe Valley area here in Gippsland. And we've put dollars behind this, and we're serious, we're committed, and it really is about these sort of meaningful employment opportunities that many of us take for granted, but just sort of doing what we can to create some of that for traditional owners. So that's our last slide. I understand we're taking some questions and Q&A at the end, so I'll hand back to you, Lucy.
Thanks for that, Michael. And there is a question from Adele, but I will come back to that later because I think it's probably going to be relevant in terms of how things were paid for all businesses. So I'd be interested to hear some other businesses respond to that as well. But yes, certainly. And just a reminder, you can use the Q&A to put in your questions as you're going, so pop them down so that you don't lose them. And if there is a specific person you'd like to respond to them, add that in. But we will put these questions to others as well, where we see that there's some transferability. So from Wannon Water, I'd like to introduce Kelly and Joe. Kelly is an experienced engagement professional who's been at Wannon Water for 9 years and very central to the engagement programs that Wannon Water has been running. Kelly loves the opportunity to serve her community in an organisation that has a focus on putting people first. In her spare time, she is excited to make the most of the beautiful Peak Coorong country along with her families and friends. Fun fact about Kelly is that she's a regular attendee of Port Fairy Folk Festival, but I thought that might go without saying in your neck of the woods, Kelly. Also like to welcome Joe. Joe is the Executive of Strategy and Innovation at Wannon Water and currently on a leave of absence. So thank you for coming back to the office to join us for this webinar today. Joe comes from a background in strategy, governance and facilitation and loves a whiteboard. So do I. Joe, you're a woman after my heart. She brings the experience in inclusion and diversity to create environments for meaningful change. Joe is an active board volunteer, currently the chair of the Women's Health and Wellbeing Barwon Southwest and deputy chair of Western District Food Chair. When Joe is not doing all of those various elements, you can find her caravanning in country towns with a family and gazing out of windows with a cappuccino in hand. Thanks very much, Joe and Kelly.
Thanks, Lucy. I'll start by acknowledging the Peak Coorong people of the Maar Nation where I'm speaking from today, and I want to recognise and value their ongoing contribution of First Nations peoples to enriching our community, our country and waterways. Also want to pay my respects to First Nation people from each of your locations today and any First Nations people joining us on the call. I just need to start by saying I was a little bit anxious to present at this forum, and this area of First Nations engagement is one that we see can be really greatly improved for our business. So we don't in any way by presenting today proclaim to have this all sorted out. We still have absolutely a lot to learn and a very long way to go, and we're really working on that. The other thing I want to note is that this presentation sort of focuses more on our broad approach for engaging with First Nations people and not necessarily the specific engagement in the lead up to the last prize submission. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, similarly as was discussed in the last presentation, we don't see engagement with First Nations people as an instance or a period of engagement, whether for the prize submission or other initiatives. We see that engagement as about relationships over time, and like all relationships, they're dynamic and they keep changing. The other's quite practical and relating to a challenge I'll get to later on, is that the key people involved in the First Nation engagement during the lead up to the last prize submission are no longer in the business. So given that, I'll do my best to sort of be representative of some of that work, but might not always have the details. So I just want to give a chance to Jo to introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. I also wanted to acknowledge the Peak Coorong people of the Maar Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present and any traditional owners that are online today as well. I am on a leave of absence and it's great to be back in the Wannon Water building today. And I've had the opportunity on that 12-month leave of absence to be working for Eastern Maar Aboriginal Corporation, but I won't be wearing that hat today.
Thanks. If we could perhaps change the slide, that'd be great. So moving from the east of the state to the west of the state, Wannon Water is located in the southwest corner, covering about 10% of Victoria. The map on the right-hand side there shows the boundaries of Wannon Water with the white line and the registered Aboriginal parties that coincide with our area. So in particular, Gunditj Mering in grey on the left there and Eastern Maar in light orange on the right. We also have in our service area Aboriginal Wurundjeri and also Wadawurrung. It's a very small portion of our service area, and we've had very limited engagement with those TOs that I'm aware of. I also want to reference two particularly important locations in our region. Of course, there are many, but we are very lucky in our region to have the Budgebim World Heritage Listed Cultural Landscape. So that's around about where the number 5 is on the map there. And also the Framlingham Trust as well, which is around about where number 8 is as well. If we can perhaps change the slide. Thanks. So having said in my introduction that the presentation is not specifically going to focus on our engagement for the price submission, here is a snapshot of what we did. So we did lots of engagement over the 5 years in the lead up to the price submission, and each of those wider activities, we aim to achieve at least the same level of engagement with First Nations people as the proportion of people identifying as First Nations in the community. So we did that, we slightly exceeded it. An important part of that was giving people the opportunity just to indicate if they identify as First Nation, but also reaching out through our relationships with First Nation stakeholders and individuals as part of our planning for those wider engagements to invite that participation. We also had some direct engagement as well with Eastern Murrumbidgee Mirroring specifically on some issues for our price submission and others. If we can perhaps change the slide, thanks. I just want to contextualise all of this within our wider engagement approach. So this is our engagement definition in the centre and our engagement framework at Wannon Water. So we use this for all of our engagements, not just First Nation engagement. And if you just focus in on the centre of the circle, I want to point out 3 parts of the definition which are quite critical in our thinking for all our engagement, but particularly First Nations peoples. So the first one is that word genuine and how we approach engagement. So it's not about ticking the box. And now's probably a good time to mention that the artwork that you're seeing in the background of this presentation is not about box ticking. It's as a result of a relationship, and Jo will share more about that with you later on. The second one is around building capacity, and in the case of First Nation engagement, this is two-way. So it's working on cultural competence for Wannon Water, but it's also about considering how we can support opportunities for First Nations people in areas they express an interest in. And the final one is strengthening relationships, but we'll come back to that theme later on. If we can change slides, please. For those who haven't seen this, this is the Aboriginal Participation Guideline for Victorian Catchment Management Authorities. So I realise it looks pretty busy on the screen there, but you can Google it and have a look at it yourself in more detail if it's of interest. We were first introduced to this with our partners at the Glenelg Hopkins CMA. And when we first saw it, we saw it not only aligned really strongly with our engagement definition, but it's been a really useful frame for our understanding of First Nations engagement and really helpful as a backdrop to our thinking. You can keep going, Christy, please. Thanks. So given some of that background, I'll just now talk to our broader approach in relation to First Nations engagement. And in particular, it's about that relationship-based approach as it is with Gippsland Water. So we've got offices throughout our business that work directly with First Nation groups and peoples on a variety of different activities. So that means we've got lots of individual to individual relationships in our organisation with people in TOs and ACOs and other organisations. So while that's actually a really great starting point for being genuine and building capacity, it's got multiple challenges, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. So the biggest one is turnover, both in Wannon Water and in the other organisations. So when an individual leaves either of those organisations, a relationship of trust that's taken quite some time to build often goes back to square one and you need to start again. And we certainly understand that the level of maturity, next level of maturity for that relationship is organisational to organisation relationship. I think it's fair to say we're still working towards that. The other one is around coordination. So when you've got lots of different individuals in our organisation working with different individuals in other First Nations organisations, there's a challenge around how you best coordinate that and the resource needed to do that. So perhaps if we move on to the next slide, and I'll talk about some of the ways that we've been investing in supporting First Nations communities. So this is a timeline which is a bit of a snapshot of some of the First Nations related initiatives we've done over the last decade. So it doesn't represent all of the initiatives, but does provide a bit of an indication. So many of them have come about through direct feedback and relationships with First Nations people, such as the Yarra Water project, which relates to eel farming within the Budgebim cultural landscape. and also the Kanongwatong Quiet Place, which recognises a massacre site at the Kanongwatong Reservoir that we manage near Coleraine. Some of them are around supporting leadership, governance and liaison capability as requested by some First Nations people in our areas. So, for example, the Aboriginal Board Observer, and not on the timeline there, but we've provided several scholarships for First Nations people to participate in the Great South Coast Leadership Program, and also trainees as well. We've got a couple of particular case studies to share with you. So perhaps if we can move on to the next slide. So interesting to see the work about to start at Strathmore. And so this first case study is the Indigenous War Memorial at the Hayward Water Tower. So the memorial commemorates the participations of First Nation people in World War I and II, and in particular commemorating Frederick, Herbert, Edward and Leonard Lovett, who are all brothers, and also Reginald or Reg Saunders. So the project was a result of the work of participants in the 2020 Leadership Great South Coast project, and that included several First Nations people and a Wannon Water employee. So on the left, you can see the water tower before the mural, a bit like the Strathmore one at the moment, which hasn't been in active use for some time. So when the Goodrich Mirroring TO group and Leadership Great South Coast group approached us about this project, we saw it for the great opportunity that it was. It was painted in 2021, also as the nod to Strathmore, it was painted by Adnate and also Levi Gbun. And the mural includes artwork from Tommy Day and highlights Gunditjmara artefacts such as possum skin cloaks and eel traps. The project as well is about to be featured by the Australian War Memorial because among other war memorials, it stands out because it's a real statement to recognise the particular challenge faced by Indigenous people who fought for our country but never received the same recognition that other Australians received. So there is a video on our website if you'd like to see more. For the next case study, I'll hand over to Jo.
Thanks, Kelly. The artwork that you've seen throughout the presentation is a piece by Sherry Johnston, a Kirewurrung Yorta Yorta woman of the Maar Nation. And I actually met Sherry through the Water Nanda group, which you can see on screen there as well several years ago. And it was at one of these meetings that she was showing me some of her artworks that she had, and we ended up purchasing the artwork on the right there, Hypnotic Waterways. It's absolutely amazing when you see it in person. There's detail that you can't really see in a picture format. And what's also more amazing is when Sherry talks about this artwork and the connection that I get when she does that. We purchased the artwork just prior to COVID. So we had intended for Sherry to come into the organisation and share about the artwork and people could see it in person. So after COVID, we were able to have Sherry into the office and she spoke about this artwork and the other artworks and shared her cultural knowledge and stories as well, which was amazing. It wasn't for a couple of years later that we then looked to license the artwork. And so that's why we've been able to use it in things like the screen you can see today. And I just wanted to share that as an example of building on one opportunity to another when the right timing presents itself.
Thanks, Jo. Just to finish off, so looking ahead, and we've just come to the conclusion of our Reflect wrap as well. I've mentioned that we see that there's an opportunity to enhance and strengthen our current relationships and approaches. So we are currently doing some work around getting our internal house in order. And that's really around three areas. One, around increasing our internal cultural capability, not culpability, I hope, and cultural safety as an organisation. Continuing to build trusted relationships with TO groups and other Aboriginal controlled organisations and others in our region. And identifying and supporting participation in water resource and environmental management and self-determination. So while we've made the smallest of starts in our relationships and collaborations with First Nations people in the area, ultimately we really do see that the future can and should look different as we continue to learn from and work more collaboratively with First Nations people in the years to come.
Thank you so much, Jo and Kelly, for that presentation and for sharing about that work and the connection that you've built over time. Our next presenters are from Yarra Valley Water. I'd like to welcome Tamara Beck and Brett Matheson. Tamara is the Senior Project Manager of Reconciliation at Yarra Valley Water. A proud Palawa woman, she's deeply driven by her commitment to creating a better society for future generations. She joined Yarra Valley Water 2 years ago. And a fun fact about Tamara is that she was the third Aboriginal girl in Victoria to play for the state netball team. So, Brett has been at Yarra Valley Water for 29 years. He's been actively involved in every price submission to the Essential Services Commission and even participated in the establishment of the first industry customer charter when the Commission was known as the Office of the Regulator General. He was involved in setting up Yarra Valley Water's Customer Advisory Group. He has overseen the evolution of its customer engagement at Yarra Valley Water, establishing its Citizens Jury in 2017, and with the price and the 2023 price submission having a focus on hearing from customers that they usually don't hear from. Brett, we know well, is a passionate supporter for the Roos, the Tillies and the Spurs, and a fun fact is that he started his career at Ernst & Young in its insolvency division and is hoping that he doesn't end his career at Yarra Valley Water in insolvency. Very cute, Brett. On that note, I pass to Brett and Tamara. Thank you both.
Thanks, Lucy. I'll talk a little bit about our engagement that we did for our last price submission, and then I'll hand over to Tamara to talk about what we're now doing. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians and owners of the land on which we rely and operate. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. You'll notice also that picture in the background is the land on which I grew up in East Gippsland at Eagle Point. I grew up on a farm. It was only in my family for 3 generations, but even though I haven't been living on that land for over 40 years, I still have a strong connection to that country. And my mind just cannot get around the fact that the First Nations people here have a connection to their country for over 60,000 years. And, when I think of my connection of only 3 generations, it's an amazing connection that our First Nations people have. So when we were set with as I said, or as Lucy said, we were already starting a journey on speaking to people who we don't normally listen to or don't normally hear from. That included the youth, people up in the Dandenongs who get a different level of service, people who were hard of hearing, low vision, people who had only been in this country a few years whose first language was not English. And then we also had the challenge of engaging with First Nations people on our price submission. That was a fairly daunting challenge, but we were fortunate enough and are still fortunate enough to have an Aboriginal board member, Karen Millward. So we sought her guidance and influence and help. And through her help, we established an Aboriginal working group that she facilitated, that Karen facilitated, which worked alongside our citizens jury. And we had 2 Aboriginal elders from that group come and present to our citizens jury. And they talked about caring for country. And all of a sudden, one of the draft recommendations became caring for country. The members of the citizens jury for another month or so later came back to the Aboriginal working group, talked about their recommendations. The Aboriginal working group gave them further advice. Then there was another meeting another month later where they came back and basically said, do you think it'd be okay if we made the recommendation to our jury that it was the #1 recommendation to care for country? And not only care for country, that also Yarra Valley Water should adopt that philosophy in every decision they make. And sure enough, they went back to the jury and that became the #1 recommendation. So it's just a wonderful thing to be involved in a process that resulted in a jury who had very little knowledge of care for country, very little knowledge, I suppose, unless on a personal basis, of our First Nations people to hear, understand, ask questions, and ultimately become the #1 recommendation for our price submission. And we've continued that relationship on today. But I'll now hand over to Tamara to talk a bit more about what we're doing now.
Thank you, Brett. Hi, everybody. My name is Tamara. I am really conscious of the time. So just, I guess, following off from what Brett has said, it's wonderful to hear about all these initiatives across the sector and noting that the work that Yarra Valley Water has done is really incredible with the citizens jury and the pricing submission. That was before my time. So I thought I would spend some time and give some do's and don'ts of engagement and best practices for people who might want to, you know, understand how to get to these different levels of maturity within their business. It's, I think, 25 years experience within the First Nations community working with engagement. And I cannot tell you how many times people have come to me and said that they want to engage with First Nations communities. And who do you want to engage with? I always say to them, they say community. So in the first instance, there are a lot of communities big with a lot of expertise, knowledge and insights. So needing to identify with your First Nations stakeholders is critical. Who do you want to engage with and who is your target audience? If you don't know who your audience is, and then you're not going to be able to structure any kind of, you know, effective and meaningful consultations and communications with them. It can't be a scattergun approach, because all of a sudden you'll be sitting in a room with the wrong people at the wrong time, and that's not a good look for anybody. It's important to remember that our community has been consulted for a really long period of time. So the biggest mistake I see organisations make is at the very beginning is not co-designing their consultations. Which I think we heard it from before. The co-design part, that two-way capacity building is probably one of the most critical parts in how we build relationships. And you need to be really genuine with your commitment. So you need to be able to build trust, respect, and demonstrate that over a consistent period of time. So when you show up to communities and when you engage with mob, it's meaningful, it's authentic, and it's genuine, by demonstrating you're serious about wanting to have a positive impact. I get asked a lot, how long does this take? How long does it take to make a relationship with community? My response is always is that you move at the speed of trust. That time is immeasurable. So like any relationship, the more you put in, the more you get out. It can't be those one-off relationships like the NAIDOC and Rec Week, any community consultations or project development. You need to be planned, prepared and considered with your approach, and willing to do that work from a co-design perspective, which is what Yarra Valley Water obviously have done really well with the citizens jury. And then elevating those First Nation voices with our Aboriginal board members taking the lead. And do your research as well with your traditional owners. There's a lot of community organisations. We think communities, a traditional owner, there's so many Aboriginal controller organisations in your area, land councils, know your elders. It's important to take that meaningful, tailored approach from the very beginning, because I find a reason that a lot of engagement fails is because people don't take that time. They have transactional attitudes. They're not willing to put the work in to the ongoing conversations. I think one of the biggest things I see is that where we don't have First Nation voices within a business leading these conversations, we have a lot of conversations with us, without us. So how we bring everybody and uplift the Aboriginal voices within your business. If you don't have Aboriginal staff, maybe you could look at the external consultations that you can do. And the people that are leading these projects also need to have cultural awareness, cultural capability. They need to know cultural protocols, how we're engaging with community is really important. Just having no awareness can pause that relationship at the very, very beginning. So make sure that you're investing in your staff and their knowledge before putting them out and putting them on these projects to lead, because they will fail and it won't feel good for anybody. So I think the few things I would hope that people would take away from today is if it's not focused on what Aboriginal communities want and need, then it's not going to be sustainable and you won't have a positive impact. And make sure that you're always looking for those listening moments, because there'll be those light bulb moments that you'll really need to shape the work you do, because community are our customers. And that's all from me.
Thank you so much, Tamara and Brett. We've got thanks, Adele, because you've got a second question in there. So and we will come to this again, because I think that there is a few businesses now that have mentioned that you do have multiple RAPs, registered Aboriginal parties that you work with. So we'll come to this again, and I'll put that to a few people when we get closer to the Q&A time. But we are now ready for our final presentation from Barwon Water. Greg Robinson, thanks so much for joining us. Greg, you are a Wadawurrung man living and working on country in Geelong and the Surf Coast region. You've got 5 years of focused experience in managing environmental projects across the Wadawurrung country, and you have passion and inherent commitment to caring for and protecting biocultural landscapes. You hold the position of Head of First Nation Values at Barwon Water, and you've been in the role just shy of a year. You've demonstrated to us and to all around you that you're deeply committed in enabling self-determined outcomes for traditional owners and First Nations community, and you're working tirelessly to drive institutional change, ensuring that First Nation communities are empowered to shape and lead the future of country management. And prior to this, you were a chef, Greg. You've got 12 years experience in that role, and you've still got a hot sauce business on the side. So I hope you can get a bit of a plug for that in the session today. Thank you.
That's why I included it as a fun fact. Hoping you can hear me okay. My headset's working. Yep, awesome. So thanks very much for that introduction. Yes, I'm a Wadawurrung man, and yes, I'm here at Barwon Water as the head of the First Nations Values department. Just want to firstly recognise the artwork on the first slide here of Dixon Patton. So Dixon's done the artwork for our stretch reconciliation plan that we've recently stood up. And it speaks directly to the water cycles on country, but I particularly want to point out the ant that's there, and the ant is representative of all the work we do within the organisations or within our communities, and just pays respects to that grassroots commitment to community and how it really is a bottom-up approach, and it really needs to shine that light on that community effort. So we'll go straight to the next slide. And I just do want to acknowledge that, yes, I am a Wadawurrung man, but I pay my respects to my elders past and present. I particularly recognise that I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors and channel their strength in everything that I do. But I also extend that respect to the Eastern Maar mob as well, particularly Gulidjan and the Gudabernard mobs, who Barwon Water, of whose country Barwon Water also operates on. And just pay my deepest and heartfelt respects to all mob here in the room today, particularly to you, your countries, your communities, and your cultures. And it's important to acknowledge too that while we do have a stretch reconciliation action plan, Barwon Water is on a reconciliation journey. So it has a start, but it certainly does not have an end. So if we go to the next slide, please. Really quickly on this one. So a little while ago in 2018, the Barwon Water Executive and Board reshaped their strategy 2030 to speak more directly to our customer outcomes, that being the safe, securable, sustainable water, innovative, reliable services, healthier environment, trust, value and affordability. So really making sure there's strong strategic alignment. And the particular one I'll point out is the healthier environment outcome, and more particularly the care for country outcome. And that is really in that definition of what country means. It's country with a capital C, and it's not just the physical aspects or the environmental representation of country, but it's the spiritual, the cultural, the human aspects all connected as one. It's that biocultural form, and we define that as the interconnection of biophysical, social, spiritual and cosmological relationships that First Nations people have with Indigenous species, and that emphasis on those cultural connections that are passed through countless generations. And I really want to point that definition out because that sets us up or sets the organisation up for the journey we need to walk on or are continuing to walk on with both Eastern Maar and Wadawurrung and broadly the First Nations communities within the areas that Barwon Water operates. So if you go to the next slide, so again, just going to be really quick on this. So this speaks to that engagement piece that was done. And yeah, in all honesty and transparency, this was before my time, although when Barwon Water did the price submission, I was actually working at Wadawurrung Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation. And I can confidently say I was really comfortable in giving a testimonial, back towards Barwon Water for the work they've done in managing and enabling that partnership between Wadawurrung and Barwon Water. But I just want to point to a couple of key areas that were really important for First Nations engagement, and that's the work that Barwon Water was doing, one, with the Reconciliation Action Plan. At the time, there was a sustainable water strategy happening, and then wrapping up both of those was Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar's healthy country plans that were used as the to sort of inform how we walked on those kind of processes and how we carried our engagement, recognising that traditional owners have been very clear in publishing their objectives for organisations like Barwon Water to pick up and take the responsibility on to deliver. We utilised our Environmental Advisory Committee, and we've always created space for First Nations representation, particularly Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar, and whether they have the capacity or not, that chair is always there for them to take. At the moment, we do have one independent First Nations delegate who happens to be an Eastern Maar fellow as well. So, and that voice cannot go unrecognised in that when we talk about the environment and country. There's the independent outreach we did as well. So thinking about First Nations communities in Geelong particularly, and having some of the highest density of mob that live here in Geelong that don't live on their own countries, but we take the responsibility to spend the time and yarn with them to understand what it is they need and recognise that social disadvantage that is not their fault, and how Barwon Water can sit, yarn and work out ways of, again, recognising that. And I guess goes to that regional prosperity part is everyone as equals, and creating that space for that kind of two-way learning and understanding. And we use the Wadawurrung Aboriginal Cooperative here in Geelong to reach in and have those conversations with 12 focused in-depth interviews. And, I don't like that word at risk of vulnerability. I mean, we call it culture. Some people call it cultural load. We call it colonial load. So that recognises that the journey that unfortunately First Nations mobs have had to endure. Then just lastly on this one, the combined engagement through community conversations and projects. So I'll speak to the projects specifically, particularly the Porongitch Kurong project, which I'll unpack a little bit further, that has a community reference group with First Nations representation. The Anglesea bore field, which is attached to a broader conversation around the Anglesea River, which again is represented has representation of Wadawurrung. And then looking at the Bellarine Basin as another example. So always making sure that when there's projects happening on country, that there's representation from the mobs as well. Next slide, and I'll try and keep moving. I've realised I've jammed a lot in here. Looking at the development of our 2023 price submission, some of the strengths I would like to point out are the partnership with Wadawurrung. So that's been now ongoing for close to 10 years, but just it needs to be recognised that didn't start in a strong place. But it's how you sit in those conversations and you sit in the discomfort is how you create a strong and meaningful relationship built on trust and mutual understanding. Really strongly working with traditional owners to care for country through their objectives of their country plans. The Innovate Reconciliation Action Plan, which was the foundation for our first partnership with Wadawurrung, and the cultural awareness and education training was another excellent example that goes on to date, which I'll unpack a little bit further. Two of the opportunities are the way we conduct our projects and how we've flipped, I guess, traditional project management on its head to be traditional owner-led, and that the core to that is removing timeframes and letting country tell you or walk you towards outcomes, particularly on environmental projects. and then our First Nations values principles, which I'll get to in a later slide. So if we go to the next one. So that care for country aspiration that I mentioned and the commitments there are the ongoing collaborative meetings that we have with Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar. So that speaks directly to our relationships and the partnerships, and they could be anywhere between up to, you know, weekly, but generally fortnightly to monthly. We have our steering committee meetings, but the partnership, particularly with Wadawurrung, is now business as usual across the organisation. So there's organisation to organisation relationships. It doesn't just sit with 1 or 2 or 3 people. So there's conversations that go throughout the business. The Stretch Reconciliation Action Plan, and that's that bit around recognising that while we have milestones or expectations through Reconciliation Australia, broadly it's our reconciliation journey, so it goes beyond just that. And a really important one is that water return to traditional owners. So that's the sustainable water strategy we worked on to deliver water back to Wadawurrung, and we're exploring opportunities with Eastern Maar. Go to the next one. The 2 partnerships, one partnership and one that's on a journey through relationship building. So again, I've spoken enough about the Wadawurrung partnership, but just want to shine a light on our journey with Eastern Maar. So recognising that that's in a much earlier stage. So we're spending far more time on understanding what it is that is important to Eastern Maar and how we as an organisation can pivot to deliver those expectations. But that's only going to be done through mutual understanding and a development of trust. I can't understate that enough. The First Nations leadership within the business. So I started here 12 months ago nearly as the head of the First Nations Values Department. So we're a standalone department now with all identifying staff with our own priorities and projects. And I have a voice at the senior leadership table as well and can have direct conversations to our executive leadership team, which is, I think, really important to recognise that the state is on a journey at the moment through the Europe Justice Commission and also the treaty process, and there's been invaluable conversations to bring them up to speed per se into kind of what that means for the organisation and how do we, go beyond compliance and be treaty ready without having to be told. A really, really important project is Porringitch Korong. So that's the place of the Brolga, and that's a 66-hectare piece of land here on the Barwon River in Geelong that Wadawurrung is completely leading. So that's wholly led by them, and it's reinstating what is currently a lignum swamp on the banks of the Barwon into a cultural landscape that can be celebrated and enjoyed by the community at large here in Geelong. So they can go down, they can witness traditional owner land management in practice, such as Widmerip or cultural burning, etc. And then the cultural water trials. So that's the work we're doing with Wadawurrung now in delivery of water to particular places on country, one being Dirtaborrel wetland, and then the Moorabool, which is walking towards the sustainable water strategy commitment. So it's really setting up some enabling processes so that Wadawurrung can really self-determine what that looks like. And we've seen some profound results in capacity building and just organisational learning in that as well. And conscious of time, I'll go to the next slide and sort of brings me towards the end. So the executive leadership team and the board in 2018 developed a set of principles in partnership with Wadawurrung and Gulidjan and Guddabanad at the time. And we're using these principles now in all of our organisation's business, but particularly on how we're going to get to PS 2028. And that's applying each of these principles to that journey. So that's spending more time on country, really taking the time to observe and understand the work you do and its relationship to cultural values, building knowledge, so taking on that responsibility to really understand traditional owner plans, such as country plans and nation statements, just as much, if not more, than our own organisational strategies. And that spending time to develop relationships cannot be understated. And I think Tamara made a really good point that takes time and it has to be given the time. And last slide. And I think these ones are really important in how we work as well. And it's working with and not against. And it seems like a really easy thing to say, but you'll find that in these organisations, you know, there's a very Western approach to the way we work, and that's the fault of no one. It's just the nature of the business we're in. But we've seen some amazing outcomes in how we design and operate our systems, particularly assets on country, utilising cultural values as our guiding principles. Thinking about the environment as well, and the work we do there is always trying to replenish and not deplete, and again, proactive and not reactive. So, and that goes beyond just the work, but it goes back to that relationship piece as well, is really putting a concerted effort to build your understanding and use your head and heart. I think that one speaks for itself. So just conscious I've gone a little bit over time, so I might pull it up there. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you so much, Greg, but thank you to all the speakers. And, you know, that is very much message from us, was that we really wanted to get to some good opportunity for questions from the audience today. There is so much in what you have each presented. I am, you know, in awe of the amount of time. I sort of noted at the beginning the amount of time and investment that you've all put in preparing these slides, your willingness to come along and share, and the real generosity of doing that amongst what is normally, you know, very, very busy workloads. There is a lot in what you have all shared today. We are recording this event. We will put it on our website. I think we've asked you in advance. If we haven't, we will, that we can also add your slides in. But I think there is an opportunity for people over time to come back to this session and rewatch it. But for now, I'd really like to open it to some questions. We've built in some time. We've got some generous amount of time because you've all stuck really close to schedule here. Danny, I'm aware that Michael's needed to drop off the call, so that's okay, and that we'll be directing all of Gippsland related queries through to you. So I want to now open it up to questions. We do have a couple from the floor, but I encourage everyone who's here today online to put some questions in the Q&A. We will just check them and avoid double up, but we'll be publishing them just moments after that you put them on. We've also enabled your cameras and speakers, so you are able to turn your mic on and your camera on if you want to speak directly with the presenters. But Adele, we might just kick off with you. Is there one that you'd like to start on? So I invite you to turn your camera on and your mic on. Is there a question you'd like to put to a specific panel member? Because I think most of yours are relevant to a few people here.
Yes, thanks, Lucy. And Squeaky Wheel over here being the one putting all the questions in. I'll actually go with my second question first, because I've actually want to change it a little bit because I had another thought after I'd put it in there. But just for those that are operating in regions where they've got multiple RAPs, how do you navigate tensions between the RAPs and manage the different expectations about the extent of engagement and participation? But also further to that, as we went through the presentations, you know, there's also a lot of crossover between, you know, for Eastern Maar, for example, quite a few of us are engaging with Eastern Maar. And so, you know, how do you also navigate the relationships that they've got with other water corporations and their commitments to engagement with other organisations?
I don't know whether, if you want to sort of raise your hand, you're welcome to go. Greg, I'll pass over to you to start off with.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the how we navigate the tensions. You know, I think it's fair to say that there is tension between some of the mobs, you know, that we operate across both footprints, and it's about how you set up some protocols. And I just think the work we've done in certainly acknowledging that there is a space for those conversations, but in the way we conduct ourselves, we call it out. For myself, particularly being a Wadawurrung person, I've got a direct, I guess, line to the Eastern Maar CEO, and we've got an agreement that we've reached in terms of a conflict of interest management plan. So I think it's about how you engage early and put that conversation up front, work out what your protocols are, and then have some shared values, I think has been valuable. But I think the other part to that is it is hard. There is going to be some discomfort. It's about how you sit in that discomfort and respectfully engage in that space. So I don't think there's any silver lining to it. Like, it's just that acknowledgement that it takes a degree of energy to lean into those conversations. Yeah, I suppose, is there anyone else in the room that wants to jump onto that?
I think I'm the same view, Greg. We don't have large parts of our catchment that we operate on that are different TOs, but I think that leaning into those uncomfortable conversations and just acknowledging that it's there, and being prepared to listen and just being respectful. You're not going to be able to change anything that's going on within community. But again, preparing yourself and doing the research to understand it the first instance is probably going to help you, rather than, you know, turning up for a conversation that might and ever evolving people, you know, autos have people you know, changing, rolling through. Yeah, it's not uncommon. It's probably not a magical answer for you.
Well, I think the second part to that is, how do you kind of balance the needs of both? And I think it's quite reciprocal in the way we approach it. Like, in terms of, you know, if we're doing something for one, we try and, you know, do the same for the other in terms of opportunity and ways of working. But I guess it's just creating that space, and then I suppose be advised by them, you know, whether you kind of they're interested or not. But I try and in the early stages, try and be unagendered and just be there for the yarn. And I think you'll find that you'll get to a space where there's an understanding of where the needs lie, or the objectives lie.
Thank you.
And Ellie, did you want to add to that? I know you've got some extensive experience before in your life before the commission. Is there any other areas?
I actually think Greg said it perfectly. It is, you know, a lot of it. One is understanding the groups that you're working with, and then being prepared to stay in that discomfort. And I think being frank about what you can and can't offer as well, and where, as a business, some of the lines might be drawn, and being very clear about that up front, I think is equally important. But I think Greg and Tamara said it perfectly.
Nadel, you had the other question about the water tower, and I know, Kelly, you guys have done some work in that as well. But it is a broader question, not just relating to water towers. So very interested in all the panel members here. But did you want to add anything to that? And presenters, I do, you know, it will be up to you. Jump in when you want, put up your hand, or just turn your mic off if you want to speak to it. It really is up to you where you want to connect in with which question as we go. But Adele, just, you know, perhaps you want to add a bit of context to that one as well. It's an interesting area.
Yeah, I was just interested in that. It was the Gippsland Water presentation, but then obviously Wannon backed it up and had some beautiful artwork on one of their water towers as well. So yeah, just interested to hear about how that was funded, and if it was paid for by customers, whether how that was received in the broader community.
Yeah, just from our perspective, it'll be interesting to see what sort of comments we do get now that we're actually just in the process of applying the artwork to the tower. But my understanding is that through our customer consultative committees, they were engaged through the before the pricing submission, and then there was a clear message that they wanted us to be active in these sort of areas. And the funding itself has come through our managing director's discretionary fund. So that's where we're at.
Possibly this project I wasn't completely close to in terms of a number of years ago now with the Haywood Water Tower, but my recollection is that there was multiple different funding sources. There was different grants applied for. Wannon Water also contributed in a few different ways, certainly in terms of getting the condition of the tower ready. Probably need to go back through documents to have a look and see exactly what it was, but yes, it was definitely a collaboration.
Thank you. We've got another question from Glenn. Glenn, I wonder if you'd be comfortable putting your camera and mic on, or I can speak to that question for you, just to add a bit about this one, and obviously the presenters can see the question in the chat there.
Good day, everyone. I'm from South East Water. I just had a question for everyone, for all the presenters, and I just wanted to know, would you be able to share what has worked well with like partnering with traditional owners to heal waterways, creeks and country? So that's kind of like, replenishing waterways that have been previously dammed up, and the outcomes from that as well. Have you provided additional resources? Are you looking to do so for those environmental teams to do that country? I know it's all well and good to give back water and say we're doing the right thing, through water is life and other kind of government strategies and things like that. But how are you also enabling traditional owners to carry out their cultural and spiritual, I suppose, wants and obligations, and also to talking about, how can us as water corporations clean up the water, for water quality as well. Sometimes there's flooding events and there's overflows and spills, and that affects the water quality, and that has a knock-on effect to the environment and how it flows down the waterways. Are you able to speak to if you're doing anything around that as well? Sorry to put you on notice.
I've just was trying to find my mouse there, Glenn. I found it. It was on my other screen. To come off mute. I might jump in if that's okay. Just to go back to what I was talking about with the water returns Barwon Water's worked on with Wadawurrung. So there was 3 particular ones just recently in the 2024 summer period, and they were done by, I guess the basis of it was the mutual understanding and the partnership. So it was built up from there, and there was obviously there's the sustainable water strategy, which was a huge piece of work to establish where traditional owners might be able to access some water return on country. Wadawurrung was quite proactive in identifying the need to, before that time come, do some trial watering to understand how it would work, what the mechanisms are that are required for them to manage it under the Act, and where the different organisations in terms of agency responsibilities will fit into that. And so Wadawurrung submitted 3 requests for supply by agreement, which are a mechanism of the Water Act. And Barwon Water, I just simply said yes, we're going to pursue this, and we're going to do it fully at the cost of our own organisation. So and absolutely through the lens of Wadawurrung's self-determined priorities. So that sounds simple on paper. It sounds like a simple yes, but there was an extensive process that had to be gone through, which was not just Barwon Water. It was the likes of Central Highlands Water, Parks Victoria, the Corangamite Catchment Management Authority, the Minister for Water. There was a whole swathe of organisations that had to be brought on the journey to get the agreement over the line. And because of the time that had been spent through the partnership in building that understanding, Barwon Water, I guess, worked really hard to lean into that. And there was multiple different gates that needed to be achieved, and if any one of those had said no, then the supplier by agreement would have fallen over and the water return wouldn't have happened. So I suppose what I'm sort of circling around to is that that shows the value of spending the time to build your kind of mutual understanding and that relationship that is built on genuine, I guess, engagement and trust. Because I can't reiterate enough, if any single person in that process had have said no, the water wouldn't have gone back to country. But it has. And so now it's being looked at across the state, I believe, from, I guess, different water organisations of how it happened. Can it be replicated on different areas with different traditional owner groups and different water organisations? And DECA has had some, I think, some significant learning from it as well. So I think it just shows that with the right with the understanding and the determination and then the will to want to do it, it can be done. You don't need to wait to be told or for legislation to change. There is ways of getting there, but it can only be done through, I guess, yeah, again, that mutual understanding, which has seen profound outcomes for country and Wadawurrung community, and is going again now for the next summer period. So it's underway. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Other suppose responses to ask to is anyone doing anything around improving water quality from flooding events and things like that, and working with traditional owners? Maybe you might not be working with traditional owners, but if you are, it'd be great to also get a bit of insight into that too.
I don't know, this is another one for Greg. We have an Aboriginal partnerships team that do this type of work. So there's probably if you wanted to reach out to me, Glenn, I could connect you with that team who do that part of the business, because I'm sure they'd be happy to share anything, that they're doing and give you some, updates, or that's kind of, it's not my skill set, sorry.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Perfect. I'll do that afterwards. Thanks, tomorrow.
No
And
worries.
thanks to Greg.
I've got a little bit, if you want, I can add to that. That's something Barwon Water's working on with the Water and Catchments team around water filtration, stormwater management, I guess, and it kind of goes back to that IWM space and understanding where cultural values kind of lie in kind of looking at how we build our assets and look at, I guess, new areas of country that are going to be developed into residential lots, etc. So there's certainly work happening in different ways, shapes and forms, but in terms of direct water quality, there's not directly here at Barwon Water, but Barwon Water has a partnership with the Corangamite Catchment CMA, or at least a very strong relationship, and Wadawurrung has a partnership with the CMA. So there's a really strong collaboration to catchment scale projects, looking at where cultural values lie and particularly the spirit of water and it as a living entity. So I think it goes to that the power water corporations, water organisations have for, I guess, coordinating catchment scale efforts. Again, and it goes to understanding first, what are the objectives, what are the priorities for traditional owners? And I think we're all very fortunate in that traditional owners have been quite forthright in publishing them in various different ways, shapes and forms, whether it's a country plan, whether it's a different strategy, or etc. So yeah, hopefully that answers that one.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that, Greg and Tamara.
Thanks for that, Glenn. And Tanya, you've got your hand up, so I invite you to turn your camera on and mic. Question to
Thanks for that. Thanks, Lucy. Hi, Glenn. How are you? Glenn's on our board, so I just wanted to say, Glenn, hello. And I'm sure you're aware of the work we're doing in that space. And if we need to go through that with you, it's a funny place to say this, but let me come back to you on that as well. So, hi. Let me come back to you with that detail, because we've certainly had some innovation work in that space as well.
Awesome, great. Thanks, Tanya.
Good on you. Thanks. Good to see you.
So, Jared, I'll just invite you, for those who haven't yet met you, the newly recently appointed chairperson at the commission, so we'll just put you on spotlight. Just mindful that we're getting close to the end of the session, but is there any questions you've got for the panelists that we can?
Well, thank you, Lucy, and thank you to all the presenters. It's been very insightful discussion. I've particularly learnt about your insights around engagement with traditional owners. It's been very helpful. My question, I wonder if there's any experience or lessons that anyone wants to share from engaging with First Nations people and families as customers. So issues around customer service or payment issues or other issues, and whether there's been any experience or lessons in that regard.
Jared, I'm going to have to be really honest here and say that's sort of within my time at Barwon Water. I've not yet had to have a conversation like that, but I certainly know that there is or has been in the past, and particularly as I kind of spoke to earlier, we do have a really good relationship with a few different organisations here in Geelong, particularly the Watherong Aboriginal Cooperative, but other organisations that work very closely with First Nations communities here. And I suppose without going too much into the details, there has been a concerted effort to hear from them, but it does recognise that Geelong does have the highest, population of First Nations community, particularly in that northern Geelong reach. So I might just, if you're comfortable, take the rest of that on notice, but it's certainly something Barwon Water's put significant effort into.
Thank you, Greg.
Hi, Jared. It's I think much the same as Barwon Water. We have these conversations a lot within the business about what it is that we can do to hear more from our First Nations customers. So we've kind of got a bit of a plan in the works now about what a research piece looks like to be able to work with communities to understand any vulnerabilities they're experiencing, how we can better engage if we are creating barriers to, our services. There was we had an idea around whether we just kind of bite the bullet and maybe look at rolling out like a line or a First Nations liaison and all that. But again, taking a step back to understanding that it's important that we're listening to community and understanding what those needs are to better connect with our customers is something that we is definitely on our radar and action in our wrap that we're launching in the new year.
Yeah, and I think probably from Wannon Water perspective as well, Jared, hi, nice to meet you. We're pretty early in that regard. So you'll see that we've tried to make sure we incorporate First Nations voices throughout sort of our wider engagement when we've been talking about things, but we haven't necessarily cut the data in such a way to look at if there was something different being asked for in a different way or in a different approach or a different priority. We've got some work that we're doing around really trying to enhance our customer experience maturity as well. So I suspect that as part of that work, we've got sort of a pillar that focuses in on that space that we'll be doing more in the future, but it's still early days.
And just getting to that time of the day where we will start moving to our final wrap-up area, but I noticed we've got a couple of raised hands, Tanya and Glenn.
Yes, just super quickly, Gerard, in answer to your question, we of course have support policies regarding vulnerable members of our community, and we have, as part of not just our obligation, but our deep relationship with our communities in the Gippsland area, a very strong engagement and partnership with businesses as well as leaders in the community in terms of ensuring that we never ever walk back from our promise to working into community in a really real way. And Danny could talk to that further. And I feel strange speaking on you, Danny, but that's the work that you do.
Not at all, Tanya. It's nice to have someone else from the exec team on on the chat, so help answer those questions. Thanks, Tanya.
And Glenn, put your hand up.
Hi, I just also wanted to share kind of what me and my team here are doing at South East Water and the customer experience as well. One thing that we've noticed is that it actually costs money for our customers to call up to say, well, if they're in financial hardship and if they want to have a chat to someone, they have to, if they've got a prepaid mobile account and they've got no credit, or they've only got $5 worth of credit left, and then they're on hold for 5 minutes and there goes their credit, that's actually a barrier. So we've identified that at the moment. So it's still early days, but also too around that customer experience as well. It's bringing awareness to those people who do have that contact with our customers in the call centre, and making sure there's a bit more awareness or cultural awareness around that, and looking at, well, how can we provide a better service? Do we have actual people who have slightly more expertise to provide that service to vulnerable Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander customers? So that's still very early days, but that's something that we're looking towards in the first instance, and we're looking forward to doing our second Reflect wrap, and we're in the process of doing the engagement pieces around that. So we're really looking forward to raising that with our customers and getting that feedback around what works best for them as well.
Thank you. Everybody who's shared today, particularly to our presenters. I've got a couple of wrap-up messages that I do want to share with everybody here, but before I do, Ellie, I'm just mindful that there's something, just want to invite you back as well, just for your own thoughts around the session today.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's stuck it out through a really fascinating series of presentations. I really want to thank all of the presenters. I really think what's been brought to the fore is the importance of building those relationships with First Nations communities and traditional owners as an essential part of being able to really achieve outcomes that are mutually in the interests of both water boards and water businesses and traditional owner groups in particular. Thank you for the knowledge. Thank you for the skills. This is an evolving and ongoing conversation. We know that there are future issues, around treaty, around climate change, that mean that these are ongoing conversations, and we really look forward to being able to support and facilitate those conversations into the future as these relationships continue to evolve. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Ellie, and thank you everybody for today. You will see in the Q&A a link to the Survey Monkey. We really appreciate the feedback that you can give us to help us with the quality and the inclusiveness of our engagement. I do want to thank again all of our presenters. You've done a huge amount of work. We really we value this. It is important to us as a sector, to the uplift that we want to see. And the recognition of the work that you're doing and that is already being done across the sector. Our aim in holding this forum is always a continuous improvement in meaningful customer engagement, and I can see, and that has come through really strongly around how those practices can really influence the planning and the price setting processes, but more broadly across so many parts of the business and the communities and enriching the communities that you're working in. We've really demonstrated you've all demonstrated the diversity of the approaches and the capability and the depth that you have in your organisations, but also in your own skills and professional history. There are numerous influential programs going across the state, so it is great to see a snapshot of them there. I think some of the takeaways, though, from specifically that you've spoken about is that the relationships take as long as trust takes. For us to really be aware of the cultural load, Greg, you called it the colonial load, and just that deeper thinking around the specific capability of the staff who are directly engaging and what do they need to know about their community in order to do that work in a meaningful way. And you've also spoken about the measures in place to support the mutual understanding. There's a lot of richness in these slides. There's a lot of richness in your presentations. People, I've already spoken about the ability to come back to this presentation multiple times and share it with your colleagues so that you can see the work that's being done. There are other resources available. We're not the only ones who've hosted a workshop like this. Thriving Communities Australia have recently hosted an event fostering better practice in supporting First Nations people. Eve from the Water Services Association, thank you. You've put up the link there for the work that you're doing with the Energy Charter to co-host the Better Together First Nations initiative. So really glad that you're able to connect in with this broader work that's going across along in the community. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you very much to our presenters. Thanks for Ellie for opening and closing our session. Thank you all. Enjoy the day.